computer. All right, so we're recording. Let's talk a little bit about the 12 responsibilities and attitudes of mastery. But before we get to that, what questions do you guys have about the stuff that we've been going over the last couple of weeks? We can dig into it a little bit deeper as we go on later. The 12 attitudes will kind of help us tie some of that stuff into practicality and that kind of thing. But obviously, we're going to have a lot of questions with everything that's been coming up. I know, Austin, you're working on belief structures and how to navigate that. I'm definitely going to talk about that today. Not to convince you, but to help you navigate your own beliefs so that you can be more powerful as you interact with information and just be more sensitive to the things that come through you. So that when you're faced with an information that conflicts with, let's say, a prior held belief in any way, how can you sense whether that is you're feeling a pain because it's a real conflict that you don't want to listen to, or you're feeling a pain because it's a pushback from cognitive dissonance and programming. So we'll talk about that so that you can start to navigate that a little bit better and be a little bit more powerful in those kinds of interactions and that kind of thing. So we'll talk about beliefs a little bit today. We'll talk about the attitudes of mastery, and we'll talk about how we can work on shifting those so that we're actually running on a clean blueprint, not one that has other people's imprints and things on it. Okay. Part of the process of spiritual integration is connecting with the higher frequencies of information or higher dimensional identities and embodying them in the physical. And the first step to doing that is reprogramming how we think. Because how we think is a direct influence in the types of particles that we are able to structure in our imagination. So if we have beliefs that are running in our system that are working against the activations that we're trying to do, even if those beliefs are subconscious, those beliefs are going to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so we want to understand that if we believe something isn't going to work, we believe something won't work for us, or we believe that certain things about money, whatever it is, we will find that those beliefs will come true simply because that's how the creation engine works through us. And so, as I've mentioned several times, the universe is created as us and through us. And if we take into context the information that I've shared over the last couple of weeks, you'll start to recognize that the as us and through us has to do with those imprints and symbol codes that are part of our genetic structure, and how that then influences what energy can come in, what that energy translates to, and what that outpictures as in our waking reality. And the more we can understand where those are, or what it feels like to have information coming in and be distorted, the more readily we can alter those codes, the more readily we can balance those underlying programs, and the more readily we can begin to just create more powerful programs and algorithms that run in our life, so that we can actually program our subconscious to create money. We can program our subconscious to see conflicting beliefs as just another idea. You know, one of the things that I think I've even posted about this on Instagram at one point, where I talked about don't think of anything as somebody else's idea or somebody else's point of view. Always think of it as somebody else's fantasy. If we always look at all of these conflicting ideas as fantasies, no matter whether it's our fantasy or it's their fantasy, and we're all living different fantasies, you don't have to argue against somebody else's fantasy because you're calling it a fantasy. And that is an easy way to start bridging the gap when you see somebody outside in today's world who is running around with their head cut off because they think the world is ending, and they think everyone is racist, and they think everyone is going to get sick with this deadly disease. And you have the other world who sees through that veil and realizes, oh, these are mind control programs that are running. And how do you then, how do you live on a planet where both of those exist? Well, can multiple people have their own fantasy? Yes, they can. Can multiple people tell their own story? And can they have points of view that you can see as fictional without you needing to, you know, you don't read You don't read a fiction book. You don't read a book about Star Wars and or the Lord of the Rings, and you judge the fiction as being non-fictional. Now, there's a lot of truth in a lot of those books, which is why I chose those two examples. But you don't read those and judge the content of the book because it conflicts with your beliefs. You read it because it gives you information. You read it because of the world that it can create, because it can create a fantasy for you. And the reason we want to approach it through that avenue is because it allows you then to open up a new gateway to information. And when we start to open up that new gateway, it will allow us to absorb new ideas through a different input that doesn't conflict with the original program. Especially with religious programming, especially with like money programming, especially with relationship stuff. All of these things really have a nice benefit when you are able to get that information from other avenues, receive it, download it, transmit it through your nervous system, and then you can let that start to unfold and prove itself right, because the code isn't trying to overwrite a broken code. It just gets installed elsewhere and starts running, and then you can say, oh, that is coming true over here. But my old thing is also coming true. Why? Let me see what happens if I start to uninstall the old code and pay attention more to the new one. So I can build momentum into that and do that kind of thing. And we can talk a little bit about what that might mean more specifically when I get to digging into that. So the 12 attitudes of mastery. And these are going to lead into the 12 responsibilities of mastery as well, because once we know what the 12 attitudes are, then we want to know, how do we behave in our waking life, or how do we make our choices around that? So I've written some things down. I'll read some of it. I'll talk about a little bit more of it as we go into it. Let me see, some of these. Muted. Oh, okay. All right, so the first one, so we have 12 attitudes. So we have, the first one is love. And when I say love, these are almost you can almost think of all of these as like an affirmation or a meditation that you can do on each individual one. So the love is the recognition of truth, that we are, of the connection between all of us. So when we kind of look at the sessions that I did in the past couple of weeks about the fundamental particles that make up the entire, that entire layer of creation, one thing I want to talk about is the eternal positive context of creation. When I say that, what I mean is even the bad things that happen to us are always designed to lead us back to alignment with that eternally positive aspect. And so if we can recognize that layer of how creation works, it'll also allow us to navigate a lot of the circumstances that may be coming up for us now. They may have come up for us in the past. They may be coming up for us. They may come up for us down the road. And understanding and always recentering ourselves around that eternally positive context is not to say, stick fingers in your ears and ignore all the negative. What it helps you do is understand that even the negative things that are not our preference are still in a positive context leading us to our greatest evolution. And that is meant to be a reframe that helps you step into more power around that. The aspect of love is the idea, not that we should be loving to everybody and we should be doing all these things to sacrifice ourselves for everybody else. What love is fundamentally is the energy that ties everyone together as part of that underlying desire, that underlying positive context. And so when we understand that connection to the fundamental particles between everyone that we're all sharing in each other's, through our own bioenergetic fields, through the energetic field of the earth, through the subatomic particle vibrations that we share when we're around people, or even when we're communicating this way. The more we can recognize that and understand it, the more we're going to have we'll interact with people in a different way. right? So when we understand that all of the things that come up that are not our preference are still part of that positive drive in the universe, when we understand that we are all connected in that mechanism through the subatomic particle vibrations that do tie us all together. You know, if you want a visual, if you imagine a really fine grid that has a bunch of dots on it, and this represents kind of that morphogenetic template. Well, on that grid, there's an infinite grid with an infinite number of points. Well, each of us exists on that grid as a focal point of that grid, where a bunch of those points have all collected to create a human shape. That doesn't negate all of the other points that are around us and between each other that are still part of that original grid, right? So if you imagine this thing, and then you have, you know, if you have a bunch of dots around each of my hands or as a grid, well, there's points in between all of these points that are still part of that same grid. They have just been focused into a form-holding container that is my hand or that is my body. And so when we understand those mechanisms and how they flow through the DNA and the natal capsule and the electromagnetic fields around our body to create this physical form, you will be able to then understand, oh, that's actually how we're connected. It's not that we are all one and we all have to sacrifice ourselves to be this homogenized collective. It's to understand the interconnectedness of all things within that container, whether it's the desk or your dog or just other people in your family. We are all connected through those same underlying particles. And that's kind of what that means. The second one is grace. And that's basically allowing all of the things to be what they are, regardless of whether it suits you. And what that means is sometimes things show up that aren't your preference, and the more we fight them, the more we pour energy into them. And if we can have grace and live in perpetual forgiveness, then when we see these things that are happening on the streets where people are looting, or we see the things about sex trafficking, or we see these just horrible, evil things from our perspective, we can always have grace and understand that some things that happen are not our preference. Some things we have a lens that says this is right and this is wrong. And we have to learn to be able to sit in our own programming around that so that we can then have compassion and forgiveness for these people. So these people are still humans. And that's really, really important for us to remember, because if we are disempowered by being angry at someone, if we're disempowered by saying, you are doing things I don't like, you're being racist, you're being blah, 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 then we are actually giving our power away. We're leaking energy into that program, and that is going to perpetuate that program, not solve that program. And so if we can have grace within this, we can actually live in that perpetual forgiveness, where we can see those people doing what they're doing, whether it's the most evil thing on the planet, and we can forgive them because they're humans doing their best. They're humans who maybe, you know, were afraid, and they're humans who had a family to take care of, or you know, they were promised a dangling carrot and they didn't know what the ramifications were of that, and then they basically were backed into a corner they weren't aware of. And there's a lot of that happens with all of those things that come up, and it's really important that we can zoom out and start to say, you know what, these people are still humans. They may not be doing what I like. They may be being mean to me and calling me names. They might be, you know, shaming me in different ways because of their own programs, but I can still forgive them, and I don't need to operate on their same program. Just be and engage with it, right? And we can choose how we can engage with those kinds of things. The third one is gratitude. And that is kind of, I don't like the word gratitude. I like the word appreciation. And appreciation is more of an action, whereas gratitude is always looking into the past. So when we look at gratitude, what I want you to kind of transition that word into is the appreciation of how things unfold. It's the appreciation of the aliveness of the universe and its mechanisms for moving forward in time, for allowing things to evolve. So if we are having to sit in grace about something that is not our preference, also appreciating that exists as a mechanism to propel us forward is very important for us to be able to navigate whatever is coming up to us in the most powerful way. We don't get lost in the story of, oh, I can't afford this. I don't have enough money to do this. I can't make this happen. We can start to empower ourselves to recognize where we start to tell those stories. Gratitude, the reason I don't really like gratitude is always looking into the past. So no matter what you do, if you have to be grateful for something, you are looking backwards to appreciate it. And if you look backwards to appreciate it, you can't create everything that is created in your time, in all of the timelines within which you exist, they're created from the present moment point of power. That present moment point of power sends ripples forward and backward in time. And so we need to make sure that when we are setting our intentions and we are setting our present moment point of power, that we're not ignoring the past and we're not lying about the past, but we take the past as it was and we bring it into the present moment point and we integrate it for what it is, as literally all it is, not to change it, not to make it anything else. We simply integrate it. And then we set the intention of what we want it to be or where we want it to lead us. From that present moment, once we have integrated that past and brought it into the present, it sets a ripple in place that recreates both the past and future. That then creates the rules that happened in the past that establish your present. They reestablish rules moving forward as well. This is why when you do the cord cutting, the shamanic cord cutting, we say, we talk about cutting these negative karmic ties from the past, present, future, and into infinity. Because we are working on multiple timelines where these karmas are being imprinted and removed simultaneously for us at different points of time, as well as created. So the thing we want to understand is that our experience of linear time is only because of certain frequency barriers that exist that keep us focused in our current time location. As we begin to evolve some of that awareness, we can tap into the streams of consciousness that exist outside of those time dimensions. And we can use even the lotus petals and things that I taught you in the elemental clearing rooms to tune into some of those frequencies. So each of the petals on the lotus, it tunes to a different frequency. And that each lotus deals with a different energy center. So you can move them around, you can use them to tune to different frequencies for each of those lotus once you've removed the black flower affliction, which is what the black tar stuff is that we're removing during that journey. So what we want to understand is when we want to have gratitude for how, or appreciation for how these things are unfolding, and then also understand the aspects of our past and the aspects of our present moment that are determining how our reality is outpicturing into the future, and also what kind of information is flowing into us. And so now we have some of these different tools where, okay, we've activated our lotus, we've activated some of the at least elements of it. There's a lot of layers of the plasma body activations that we can still do, but they'll automatically unfold it for you on their own, whether we do those activations or not. We can just expedite them a little bit. Now, is we do some of those different activations and we get those lotus petals to work, we're able to then use that as a mechanism to clear the miasma, which is the black flower affliction. The miasma is the same thing that causes the crystallization in your fascia. It's the same thing that comes from trauma. And so all of the things that we're teaching, or that I'm teaching in these different groups, whether it's from color puncture or it's from the soul lessons that we're trying to learn, we are working to clear that miasma so that we're not leaking energy into the antiparticle phantom universe. We're able to have that energy flow through our body properly and activate us and give us the wisdom and things that it's meant to do, as well as reactivating the bioregenesis protocols, as well as getting just certain aspects of our higher identities to activate. And I'll talk a little bit more about the layers of the body and things that we are activating a little bit later, so we don't get too derailed here. The fourth one is reverent respect. What I want you to think about when we talk about reverent respect is the appreciation of our interconnectivity and how that interconnectivity creates an electrical circuit. So when I've talked about money, when I've talked about relationship, you're always outputting an energy, and that energy is channeled back to you by the universe, whether that's through your partnerships or through your money or through your career. And we want to understand that all of these are both giving and receiving mechanisms. So if we are unwilling to receive or don't allow us to receive, then we're breaking the circuit. If we're unwilling to give as part of that exchange, we're breaking the circuit. If we are only giving but not willing to receive in addition to that, we're breaking that circuit. And so that reverent respect is the understanding that there is a scale that happens, and that we want to constantly be balancing that scale, both by giving to ourselves what we need and by giving to others as well, in the sense that it aligns with the energies that are coming through you. So this reverent respect can be by yourself, where you're able to give and receive within your own energy fields. I recommend doing that with others so you can understand what that feels like, because if you don't know what that feels like to receive, if you organically, if you don't know what it feels like to give authentically, then it'll be really hard to understand what that feels like within you anyway. The programs that say you need to serve humanity and do these things are not entirely true. They're not untrue. I think our general soul mission is collective, or our individual soul missions are always aimed to elevate the collective. They're always aimed to elevate us, and through the elevation of our own spirit and bio-spiritual transformations that we will go through, we will elevate the collective. By doing that, we will also get the information that we need to serve whatever medicine it is, whether that's through movement, or that's through the mental reprogramming, or that's through other types of activations. Anything, carpentry, art, there's a million things that people can do that are all right avenues for transmitting this kind of energy. And just understanding where you're being organic with that and where you're pushing up against the stream saying, I'm supposed to do this. Responsibility is the fifth one. Co-creating with and serving and being able to respond to the universe. So that goes along with the reverent respect. So we understand that this is a circuit, and the more we can work with that circuit, the more powerful that we're going to be. And this circuit is all part of that eternal positive context of existence. And if we can understand that some of the things that come to us are not our preference, and some of them are more empowering, and the more we can get in line or in alignment with the energies that those are, the easier it's going to be to flow throughout our lives, whether that's in our relationships or careers or whatever the case is. If we understand that in our business, we are serving we have a medicine that we're trying to serve. We have a transformation that we're trying to give. And if we understand the transformation that we went through, or we understand the transformation that we are trying to sell, it becomes much easier to communicate with the past version of ourselves that is our customer, right? Because that's really who your customer should be anyway. In some way, it should be a past version of yourself. Because if you're trying to sell to somebody something that you haven't yourself been through, it's going to be a really hard thing to sell. In the same way that, if you go to try and teach people something you haven't quite integrated and learned, people are going to feel the inauthenticity in that. And that inauthenticity radiates in that sense. So number 6 is trust. That's kind of self-explanatory. Just we want to trust in these mechanisms, because trust is a choice. And I really want to emphasize that, because a lot of us have been betrayed. A lot of us have been tricked. A lot of us throughout our entire lives have been fed different levels of programming that have given us distorted views of reality, or limited views of reality, or even just realities that are slightly disempowering to what we could show up as if we let go of some of those things. And if we can step back and say, okay, I understand that when I came in here, I had to have a blueprint of programs that were installed so that I could actually interact with this reality. So when we come down here, we have all these traumas installed as lesson mechanisms that move us throughout our life. So, the way that our parents showed us love, the way that our parents talked about money, the way that our parents talked about career, all of these different things imprint programs on us that we needed to have imprinted so that we could get started. And once we get through that tutorial phase and recognize, oh, there's my soul level identity and awareness, and then there's these programs. And do I have to keep living? When you start to recognize that there's programs and then there's something else, you can start to rewrite those programs. And then you can start to trust that the universe has both provided you those programs, or your higher consciousness, your higher self has provided you and created those programs as a learning mechanism to drive you through your spiritual evolution in the way that you need it. And so we want to cultivate a really deep level of that trust, so that when things come up that aren't our preference and we're being asked to sit in that grace of the stuff that's coming up for us, or the emotions that are coming up for us, we can trust that all of these things are flowing in that general direction. Seventh is accountability. And I talk about this a lot. Accountability is being in your truth. And what that means is being honest with yourself and holding yourself accountable to who you say you want to be, and understanding that these things take practice. So imagination work is a muscle. You don't just turn the imagination on and suddenly you can visualize, and suddenly all these things start to come in, and suddenly you can hold that container of information. It is something that we strengthen. The container gets larger, the container gets more detailed, the container gets more vivid. As you strengthen that muscle, the same way you strengthen your physical body. We just have spent our whole life being told that those things aren't real, those things are evil, and we shut those things down. And because they were shut down by a suppressive program from our childhood, we have to recognize, not only do we have to peel the layers of that program to let some of that leak through, but we have to eventually remove that and then strengthen the muscles that have never been worked. So if you want an analogy for how that happens, let's say that you had an injury and that injury sticks around. So maybe you twisted your ankle, or you injured your ankle at some point, or you injured your knee, and you have a knee tweaky thing that shows up every once in a while when you're doing certain activities. Well, that is a container that has been sealed. And we want to understand what information is in that container that causes that injury to keep coming to the surface, because it's an energetic creation on a more fundamental level. And so if we can understand, okay, there's energy there, there's information there that I need to move. Well, what if I start exercising these areas and training and stabilizing it? So think about an injury for a second. When the body has an injury, it senses instability. When the body senses instability on a joint or just an area of the body, because the body doesn't know what a shoulder is, it just moves stuff, right? And so when it senses that instability, the body's like, oh, this is unstable, let me lock that down. It compresses the tissues around it because it senses instability. And instability to the electrical circuit that is our body is an oscillation. So an oscillation is basically a dysregulation in how the electrical signals are being sent through that joint. When the body compresses, our fascia system is a liquid crystal piezoelectric system. And what that means is, when you compress the fascia up against the water, like a piezoelectric crystal, it releases electricity. So what the body wanted to do was saying, oh, the conductivity is funky over here, I need to fix it, compress, and it's trying to release electricity. But what ends up happening is it compresses and then it gets dehydrated. So instead of that electricity actually ramping up and flowing through the joint the way that we want, it ends up creating a crystalline stasis to try and hold the joint together, and then that energy just either builds up or it flows into that antiparticle universe as miasma. And then that creates a static structure in that antiparticle universe that is represented in the physical body. And so as we begin to notice how those mechanisms work, and we see that compression happen and it gets dehydrated, well, okay, we can do some massage work, we can do some lymph movement work, we can do some movement work to rehydrate the area. Well, now it's hydrated, it's conductive again, we can retrain it how to work. And the same thing happens through the bioenergetic system in that same way. When we hold ourselves accountable to who we're trying to be, we are strengthening the muscles of that identity. Each of us has many, many identities, and we're going to go through transitions throughout our life that allows us to step into more aspects of that identity as we go, just as a natural mechanism, as a natural rhythm of what happens through our life. And what happens for most people is they hold on to their original identity, saying, don't change me. And if we hold on to that original identity, the universe starts pushing harder and harder to get you to move forward. And if you don't listen to that signal, or you don't hold yourself accountable to who you want to be, so you just keep you know the old patterns, but you just keep repeating them because you haven't held yourself accountable to the new decisions that you want to make yet, then it eventually the wave coming from consciousness to push you into your next layers of identity will overwhelm your ability to hold on to the old identity. And that will be a much more painful result than if you decided, oh, I'm getting this signal, it's telling me to move forward. Oh, I'm getting this signal, it's telling me to move forward. And that is something you learn just through experience. And we can talk more specifically about that as we go on. 8, impeccability. Impeccability is upholding and protecting the underlying structures of these connections. And what that means is not necessarily the need to be perfect, because that's a distraction. It has nothing to do with perfectionism. What it has to do with is showing up and doing the work every day. And so when we look at accountability and we look at trust, we're already sitting in the grace of the things that are coming up. We're already trusting the flow of that energy. We're holding ourselves accountable to the transformations that we want to commit to. Impeccability is the mindset we hold around holding ourselves accountable. So we understand that we cannot do it wrong. And that's really what impeccability means, is that you don't get it wrong. You just are either more efficient or less efficient with the direction of energy flow through you into your life. And the more you recognize that, the more you can recognize that you never get it wrong, the faster you can make decisions, the faster you can alter your course and gain more information. Because a lot of times we get so stuck on doing it wrong, or I'm not showing up right, or I'm not making the right decisions, or I'm trying to change these things and I don't know if I'm ready to do that. That is a limbo. That's a stasis that doesn't allow this energy to flow through you. And so if you can always remind yourself, wait, there's no wrong decision. Literally any decision I make here is the right one because it's leading me forward. It's giving me more information. And when I get more information, I can make more decisions. And that making of more decisions brings in more information for you to continue to navigate whatever might be coming up for you. And so that impeccability is a reminder that you can't get, you don't get it wrong. And really you don't get it right either. And so if we can get rid of the idea that there's a right decision and a wrong decision, and that everything is just a decision, or everything is just information, or everything is just a fantasy, then we can start to interact with it and play the game that is being presented to us, instead of looking at what is being presented and saying, you're not supposed to be yellow, you're supposed to be blue, and you're not supposed to be green, you're supposed to be purple, and you're not supposed. And so we start to yell at our fingers instead of just actually saying, oh, these are actually fingers. I probably should just use them as fingers. And being honest with what is in front of us, instead of saying, you know, I want to look at you and say, you're supposed to be a foot, and I'm going to stare at you until you turn into a foot, instead of acknowledging that it's actually a hand and it has its own purpose in the way that these things will unfold. 9 is mindfulness. And what this means is loving, nurturing, and being attentive to these connections. So mindfulness is really paying attention. And it's not necessarily focus. So there's a difference between focus and paying attention. You can pay attention and catch something like this and move on to the next thing. It does not require focus to pay attention. So when we are mindful, we are paying attention to the circumstances and energies that are around us. That is the subtle energies that we feel when we're near somebody. That is the subtle energies we feel when we're driving somewhere or we're reading something. That is the awareness of our own physical sensations, really more than anything. Mindfulness is not just you getting hyper-focused on your breath. Mindfulness is not you staring at a tree and focusing on a tree. So focus is not mindfulness, and that is very often a misinterpretation of the idea of what mindfulness actually is people like, okay, I'm going to be mindful, so I'm going to sit here and I'm going to just listen to nature for an hour. And it's like, that's not mindfulness. What we want to understand is if you're going to sit and listen to nature for an hour, then I want you to understand the energies that flow through you when you see that bird, the energies that you sense or the emotions that you sense or the sensations that you feel in your physical body, whether it's tingling on your skin or it's a subtle energy that you feel when you experience the wind. That is mindfulness, is the energy flows that come through you. And it's a recognition and loving of how that mechanism works. It's appreciation of that unfolding, right, while you're in it. The 10th is fearlessness. If we recognize the eternal positive context of creation, if we recognize the eternally infinite nature of creation, and if we recognize that eternally loving desire that is fundamental to all of the mechanisms that work in the universe, we have no reason to be afraid. There is literally nothing to be afraid of. Fear itself is a distortion created by certain implant technologies between below the second to the top of the third energy center. And so if we recognize that fear is an implant, if we recognize that also there is no real reason for fear, then we can start to do the work of balancing the fear programs that run in us. So I don't want you to mistake that and say, oh, I'm not supposed to be afraid, right? If we have fear, we need to honor that we are afraid. We need to take our past and integrate it into our present moment point of awareness. We need to take the future that we're projecting our consciousness into and take it into the present moment point of awareness, so we can say, where am I now? What am I looking at now? What is the reality of this situation? And what is the story that I'm telling that is separate from the reality of this situation? Can I hold myself accountable to the truth of this? Can I stop lying to myself so that I make it out to be bigger than it is or smaller than it really is, and just be truthful with what it is, so that I can start to navigate the fears that make me want to make this bigger or make me want to make this smaller, right? And well, there's other sessions that I've done on fear, so I won't dig too much into fear on this one. We can do another session on fear if you guys want to dig into those more specifically. Absolutely. The 11th is engaged detachment. And this one lines up with a lot of the other ones to be. So you're basically permitting everything that is going on around you to be as it is, without you needing to judge it, without you needing to critique or change it, without you needing to condemn it. And you're understanding that the isness of it is validation of it in and of itself. What that means is, if you are seeing the looting, and you're seeing the trauma that's happening on the planet, and you're seeing all these things, it's very easy to get lost in judging people's behaviors. It's very easy to get lost in trying to rescue people from what they're experiencing, because a lot of people are experiencing fear. A lot of people are getting lost in the minutia and in the details and in the propaganda arguments that are coming out right now. And it's really easy when we can see through the veil and we know a bigger story of what's going on, and we're not operating on that same fear or those same programs, to want to also share that with other people. It's super normal to want to say, oh, you don't need to be in fear, let me help you, right? And what we want to recognize is that them being in that program, them being in that fear, them being in that position, is a catalyst created by their soul so that they could have the awakenings and the awareness that they are here to learn. There are people like you guys, there are people like me, there are people like a bunch of other teachers that are out there who show up, who embody who they are, who embody whatever it is they want to teach. And through that embodiment, through that fearlessness of you showing up as you, they will then come to their own awakening without you needing to proactively engage with them, without you needing to chase them down to fix them. These are all wounded masculine programs that we do not need to operate. We do not need to be operating on our wounded masculine to rescue people. We don't need to be saving people from their own catalysts. We need people to recognize that those catalysts are a co-creation of them, within them and their soul, and they've either gone against the divine current of where their soul's trying to get them to go, or the evolutionary drive of where their soul's trying to get them to go, or they've been in the flow of that. And so if we can see those people all within the context of that person is sick, or that person is unhappy, or that person has a bad relationship, or that person is being abused, as all of those being their catalyst and their contrast, and not needing to say, oh, you're in a terrible place, it makes me feel bad to see you in that place, let me save you from it so I can feel better. Because that's exactly what you're doing when you rescue somebody. And so if we can recognize that program within us and decide, oh, I don't need to rescue anybody, then we can participate in engaged detachment, meaning we can show compassion for people without needing to rescue them from their catalyst. We can show up as us to teach them how they can do the same without needing to rescue them from what they're going through. And that takes a lot of practice. There are a lot of programs around that, because all of the self-sacrifice programs, all of the savior programs, all of these run on the collective imprint. So they're not just individual programs that we run, they still run in the collective consciousness. So even as we clear them for ourselves, aspects of them still exist from the collective, and that's where all that shaming and stuff is coming from. And as we individually heal those programs, more layers from the collective program will be peeled away. And at a certain point, enough of us will have done that healing that whole program won't exist, because it just won't have enough momentum to stick anymore. But we need to do our own individual work to get that to happen. Otherwise, the collective programs won't heal. You can't heal the collective program before we heal the individual program. The individual program or the collective program informs the individual program then cycles back and informs the collective. And so there are certain imprints on both sides that get healed simultaneously. So one of the things that I've talked about is those consciousness waves coming through. They go through the Earth's shield or morphogenetic grid. Those then transmit into us. So through the Earth, or the collective consciousness of the Earth, the collective consciousness of the species, that information trickles down into us individually to reactivate and help us evolve through time. At the same time, we are sending signals back as we peel our own layers back to that template to refine that template on the other side. So we're kind of peeling layers off of both sides simultaneously as part of this. So the more frequencies that come in, the more awareness we get, the more we can peel from us. That then sends that blueprint back, starts to peel other layers of that other template. 12, joy. Joy is basically just a choice. The thing that I describe joy as is the absence of emotion. So emotion is energy in motion. So if, and I had this discussion with my roommate at one point, because she was really up in arms, and I said, I feel emotions this long. I do not spend time in my emotions, because emotions are energies. And they are energies that should be flowing through you and are there to teach you something, to bring you into an alignment. And if we get stuck on labeling them, if we get stuck on telling them to be something different, if we get stuck on trying to distort them or suppress them or any of these different things, we are suppressing a flow of energy through us. And that's going to be disempowering to how we can interact with our reality. It is also a takeaway. It takes away our energy from experiencing joy, which is an effortless flow of energy through us, is effectively what joy ends up being. It is not happiness. It is not the opposite of sadness. It is not a desirable emotion versus an undesirable. It is a flow of all emotions through you effortlessly. So those are the 12 attitudes, right? So these are just kind of perspectives or attitudes. The responsibilities are where it gets a little bit specific, let's say. So we have 12 responsibilities of mastery. The first responsibility is self-actualization. What this means, this is freedom from the victim-victimizer blame game. It is a willingness to be accountable for all the perceivable manifestations, and really just holding yourself accountable to the fact that everything you manifest is a direct projection of either your intended learning algorithms, so the things that your soul imprinted for you to learn from, or it is from the personal consciousness or your DNA activation. And so what we want to understand is that when we are self-actualized, we have stepped away from that victim-victimizer game, and we own 100% of the time the energies that are coming through us, the things that are showing up in our life, and how we interact with those things. And what that means is if you have, if you're losing money, or if you are losing clients, or if you are getting in a car accident, or if you win something, or if you have positive events that happen to you, or you meet somebody, or you have fights in your relationships, all of these are energetic projections from you that the morphogenetic field of the universe then carries back to you is a mirror. And so we see that mirror in our experience of our relationships. We see that mirror in our experience of how we make money and what we deem as success. We see that throughout how we interact with a lot of those different energies. So we want to recognize, where do we get stuck in that victim-victimizer blame game? Where do we get stuck saying, oh, I'm the victimizer, you need to make me feel better because you're not doing enough? Or where do we get stuck where we are looping in those old stories, where we want someone else outside of us to be different so that we can feel good when we look at them or participate with them or whatever it means? And that's hard work, because we actually have to hold ourselves accountable. We have to recognize, oh, I'm upset right now because I'm actually asking this person to not be who they are, so that they change, so they can start doing a behavior that will make me feel good. So what is it that I'm not giving to myself that I'm asking for that outside person to give to me? And being able to then recognize that, so that you can then integrate it and start to say, oh, I really am doing that. I really am asking this person to be nurturing, or I'm asking this person to be compassionate, because I'm actually supposed to be listening to myself, and I'm not. I'm not showing myself the love that I'm asking for, whatever that means. Number 2 is self-sovereignty. Freedom from the need for approval from, or the need to rebel against, any form of external authority. And this is a big one. I talked to Eric about this last week, or a couple weeks ago anyway, when we had some stuff come up. And it's through an understanding that as the manifestation of basically God's spirit, we have the ability to create personal freedom without violating the spiritual rights of others, and without allowing others to violate our spiritual rights. So the thing we want to understand is that we do not need to rebel against. So all of these things that are happening right now, they're like, oh, you need to riot, you need to stand up to the man, you need to fight the man, you need to, these are all programs. These programs do not result in the changes that people are told those programs create. The way we create change, like I said, is an internal game, is allowing the flow of water around you. So if you look at different types of martial artists, they're the most powerful martial artists understand how to redirect energy, and they know how to use energy in a way that creates the outcome that they want, as well as allowing other energies to come to them and move right through them without interfering with their own position. Self-sovereignty is an energetic version of that. And what that means is when we stand in our power, we no longer need to fight the man, nor do we need to, we don't need to reject it. We don't need to do anything. It becomes invisible to us, because regardless of what they do, we know our personal power and how we can create our own reality. So regardless of what they do, we trust that the flow of the universe is going to bring us to where we need to go. And we no longer need to fight against that. And what we can recognize is when we start to cultivate our sovereignty, our personal power, our that disconnect from us needing an outside voice or an outside authority to tell us who to be, or how to behave, or what to want, or what success is, or how much money I need to make so that I can do X, Y, Z. we can start to become sovereign so that we can establish those rules for ourselves. And we can establish those settings for ourselves so that those base algorithms that our world creation runs on can be set on a blueprint that we actually desire and that we actually dissolve, that our soul is in alignment with. 3, self-containment. Taking personal responsibility for and realizing that at all times you are accountable for directing personal energy. So I've talked about this a lot. There is no one or no thing that upsets you and thus justifies or validates any personal spiritual misuse, reaction, idea, intention, or action. So what this means is, alongside with sovereignty, nobody outside of you makes you feel bad. Nobody outside of you does anything to you. And the more we can really understand our own personal energies, the more we can respond to what is coming up in our life, rather than becoming reactive to the scenarios that are happening in our lives. So it is you who upsets yourself by allowing the emotional body to follow misperceptions of the mental body that tell you that your power lies outside yourself. At any given moment, you can choose which words, associations, and ideas you will use as the filters through which you interpret an event. Upset, mad, hurt, or any other category of labeling, conscious or subconscious, are all mental body filters that direct emotional and physical body function. So what that means is, when we label our emotions, that label to the emotion creates a physiological response to that emotion that does not need to happen because of a label imprint that we put on our body. So when we label the energy flowing through us as mad or upset, that mad or upset creates a preconditioned running of an algorithm in us that causes that constriction to happen. If we can be self-contained and not be mad at somebody because there's no one to be mad at, because of the underlying functions of how that interconnection works, then we're much more powerful to interact with it. Because the more we require someone else outside of us to make any sort of adjustment so that we can take a step, the less power we have. So the more that we can adjust, regardless of what anything happens around us, the more powerful we're going to be able to navigate our realities in the way that we actually want to navigate them. The self-contained individual recognizes that at all times the freedom of interpretation exists, and thus a negative experience and its associated disharmonic energies of upset feelings can only exist as a personal interpretation of events. Accepting any less responsibility for the direction of personal energies will place you directly into the victim-victimizer blame game, which can only take place among people who are placing their personal power and responsibility for manifestation into externalized sources. Only you have the power to upset yourself, regardless of what others say or do. You are fully entitled to your own interpretation. No one or thing has the power to upset you unless you give this power away. Self-containment comes when one recognizes that the direction of personal energies, whether physical, emotional, mental, ideas, beliefs, labels, interpretations, conscious or subconscious, is an attainable level of personal mastery and exists as an implied responsibility that comes with the gift of free will choice. The more responsible you become, the greater freedom and personal empowerment you will know. I will post all these on I've got this all written up. So I'll post all these on the membership or on the Facebook page for you guys if you want to review them. Because I think they're really good things just to remind yourself of every so often. Number 4, self-discipline. Accepting responsibility for directing personal energies toward, rather than in opposition to, the outcomes you desire to experience. The physical, mental, and emotional bodies have long directed by the subconscious forces of the hidden shadow, creating within us urges, reactions, thoughts, impulses, perceptions, and feelings that often work counter to the life creations we desire to manifest. Part of spiritual mastery entails teaching ourselves to be consciously diligent in observing our own minds, emotions, and physical body talk, so that we may employ conscious redirection of subconscious shadow energies that run on autopilot. If we learn to catch ourselves when negative thought patterns or emotions run through us, we can use that moment of recognition to reclaim this errant energy and consciously use the power of affirmative attitude, remedial word choice, and direct energy redirection to direct opposing energies of the self into fulfillment of desired constructive, spiritually mature creations. What that means, our discipline is the constant reminder of our alignment. So it is our speed at which we realign. When we hold ourselves accountable and we practice embodying who we want to embody, and we fall from that temporarily, how long do we spend saying, oh, I fucked that up, I messed that up, I'm terrible, I'm doing all these things wrong, and you have this self-talk that happens. How quickly do you recenter yourself and get back on track, realizing this is an energy leak, and the realignment is where your power is. Self-discipline is your ability to catch that signal talking, reroute it, and refocus it into the direction that you actually want to be traveling in. It takes discipline to become the lion tamer of the often roaring subconscious mind. But we do have the intrinsic power to help our subconscious shadow to evolve through loving but firm redirection into a cuddly lap cat that will gladly join us in our constructive co-creations. Self-discipline emerges when we constantly remind ourselves to employ the spiritually correct thought, action, or attitude, even if we don't feel like it when the shadow sneaks up from down under. The shadow part of self surface so that we may see these parts of self come to the conscious mind for healing. Through this process, the conscious mind itself can learn greater attributes of mastery. It is, so the more that we can, what you're hopefully noticing as I read through these is that each one builds on the previous one. Each one ties into the attitudes of mastery. Each one ties into the responsibilities of mastery, and they all are additive and co-creative. So the more that we step into the spiritual programs that we want to be running, the easier and more powerful we become progressively, because if something comes out of alignment, we own it, we realign it, and we are disciplined enough to do that, and we are self-contained enough to do that. And we are actualized enough not to blame other people for that. Number 5, self-love. It is our own responsibility to love and nurture ourselves through the limitless gift of divine spirit that moves through us at every moment. Genuine love must come from within and can only be gained through genuine spiritual connection to the eternal God self and its inherent connection to all of creation. If we seek love on the outside in order to fulfill a personal loneliness or lack within, we enter relationships as energy vampires. In doing this, we are seeking a substitute for our personal God source connection through tapping into the God source embodied within other people or beings. This is not love, it is need. This implies the lack of something essential, which in turn implies a limited personal connection to God source universal consciousness. Such lack cannot be filled by external love. It can only be filled by recognizing the God within you and thus recognizing that you are a living embodiment of absolute love. Once this is recognized, you will have the greatest love of all. And from this position of divine power, you can go into the world seeking those whom you can give this love, rather than seeking those from whom you can get love. When love is approached through self-love, the motivation is to give joyfully, knowing that anything you might need can be made manifest through the love of the active source that you carry inside yourself. Self-love is a responsibility of spiritual mastery. and I talk about this a lot. I've talked about the difference between self-respect and self-love. When these are not the same thing. So when somebody having self-love is not rejecting everybody else around you. It is not perpetually saying no to things because you don't feel like doing them. It is not betraying yourself. It's not avoiding betraying yourself so that you don't betray those around you. Those are all self-respect. We want to have self-respect. We want to not be sacrificing ourselves and doing those things in ways that are not organic to our being. And we want to recognize where we operate on those old programs and self-sacrifice programs so that we can really show up in our own power. And beyond that, self-love is a constant recognition of where you're asking the outside universe to be something different so that you can feel better. It's an ability for you to recognize, oh, I'm needing nurturing right now because I'm not giving that to myself. Or I'm needing compassion right now because I'm running myself ragged, serving everybody else, but I haven't acknowledged that I too need that same thing, given that I need to give that to myself, or I need to recharge, or I need to do those things. And it's really important that we recognize those elements so that we can recharge ourselves, so that we don't run from what we're feeling, but we are able to recognize when we're pouring from an empty cup or when we're pouring from our overflow. Because if we are giving ourselves the love that our soul is actually pouring into us all the time, then we have an abundance of overflow and we never have to worry about running out. And so we can be doing and giving and giving and giving without ever worrying about, oh, I'm going to run out of ideas, or oh, I'm going to run out of money, or oh, I'm going to run out of these things, because that perpetual flow is constantly coming through you. It's only when you get stuck in a lack mentality where you're not giving yourself that love, or you're not willing to receive the love of those around you. All of those are a lack of self-love and a program around self-sacrifice that we want to balance. 6, spiritual integrity. It is our absolute responsibility to choose to act within spiritual integrity at all times. There's no excuse to knowingly violate the spiritual rights of others, regardless of how poorly they may react to you. Spiritual integrity requires that we begin to look at what we are really doing in the way we live our lives. Do our eating habits violate the plant, animal, or earth kingdoms? Do our choices of words and actions show respect for other people and life forms? Do we play survival of the fittest, lack game to give ourselves an excuse for unethical behaviors in money matters, such as showing our silent rebellion against the government by trying to cheat on taxes, or by showing up a fellow employee at work to prove you are more worthy and thus more entitled to favor? Do you tell people what they want to hear in order to gain their approval and support, even if it's not fully true and does not reflect your personal needs or feelings? Do you try to get others to do your share as far as work or responsibilities? Do you use erroneous excuses such as race, gender, creed, academic, or economic status to justify disrespectful, exploitive, or unkind treatment of others? Spiritual integrity requires that we take a good, hard, frequent look at how we conduct our lives, to face the areas of activity in which we are performing in less than spiritually congruent ways, and to employ active commitment and discipline to bring these areas of our lives into spiritual integrity. One does not get through the gates of heaven or anywhere else desirable through using excuses for not employing genuine, not feigned spiritual integrity. Cultivating spiritual integrity is a major responsibility on the path of spiritual mastery and the way the universe works. You can't leave home without it. This means that there is a biological reality of spiritual integrity that manifests chemically within the DNA as a result of the state and focus of consciousness. If you do not possess a sufficient amount of spiritual integrity in your consciousness, neither will your DNA template. And though you might be able to pull the wool over your eyes, over the wool over the eyes of others, your own biology will eventually be your own taskmaster. Passage through any stargate requires a sufficient amount of chemically encoded spiritual integrity of consciousness. What that means is we want to understand our motivations. We want to understand why. We are on a planet that has been poisoned. And because of that, we have to eat other consciousness, whether that's animals or plants or any of these different things that are out there that we can consume as fuel, are all part of the same consciousness that we are made up out of. Plants are living when we eat them. Animals can give their lives to us for sustenance. And so we want to understand our appreciation and our gratitude for those beings for providing their energy to us to sustain us in that way. We also want to understand, how do we interact in our business? How do we make money decisions? How do we present our products? So one of the things that I've noticed recently with my infrared panels, I've been learning more and more about the different colors of the different dimensions. And the more I learn that stuff, the more it doesn't make sense to have only blue and only red. This whole biohacking argument against blue light just never made sense to me with what I knew about color puncture. In the same way, having only red light seems, while it does serve a really important function on D1 and the subharmonics of D1, we also have other energy centers. We also have other color rhythms that our system operates on. And as I learned that, I started to recognize, well, maybe it's not the red light and infrared that is as important. Maybe it's the infrared that energizes our cells, and the other colors are what give our body the information. Red happens to work on D1. And we also have other colors that can facilitate other pieces of information in our bioenergetic field. And as I've learned that, I have wanted less and less to sell my infrared panels, not because they don't work, not because they're wrong, but because now I know there's a better solution that is more in line with what I like to teach and with my highest spiritual integrity. Means that I know of a better solution. I can create a better solution. I don't want to sell the old one anymore. And it just literally stopped selling. I probably mentioned my panels 5-6 times over the past week and haven't had a single sale on them. And that's not because people don't want them. It's because my energy output is not letting that happen anymore. Because when my soul says it's time for me to be done with a certain thing, it says X. And that energy doesn't work anymore. And it forces me to refocus very, very quickly to build forward whatever it is that I'm trying to build forward. And I very much appreciate that now, but for a long time, I would drown and lose everything like I did in my audio business, because the universe was telling me to move on. And I was like, no, I have to keep this afloat. Let me keep using this bucket to pour water out of my ship. And so I had to recognize the authenticity in what my energy and when I'm selling my infrared panels, and how if I don't have that authenticity, I don't have the energy connected to it that I need to have in order for me to get transactions back for that. So this number 7 is appreciation. So I talked a lot about that again, but I'll read this one too, because I wrote this is a good one also. That I think it's just a little bit of a different angle than what I wrote about for the attitudes of mastery. So our present society continually teaches us to want more, need more, be more, do more, etc. We are constantly influenced to perceive what is lacking in order to motivate us to buy more, work more, pay more taxes, and be good little consumer sheep. Very rarely do we stop to think about all that we do have, beginning with the gift of life and mental free will choice. Through this disoriented perception filter, we can cultivate a full-blown mutation of mental consciousness. In this mutated consciousness, we begin to believe that we are entitled, that someone owes us, God, the universe, our parents, spouse, children, employer, government, etc. Once we fall into this "you owe me" mind trap, we set ourselves up for continuing self-created frustration as we place unrealistic and untrue expectations upon life, others, and ourselves. We can also often get mighty angry or hurt when we find the universe doesn't conform to our imagined pictures. No one owes us anything. If we feel we are owed, then we are entertaining lack consciousness and a void within the self that is being recognized. If we give to another in order to receive for ourselves, such as do banks and often parents, spouses, or lovers, and the other does not pay back what we expect to receive, we may feel cheated, taken advantage of, or owed. In fact, these situations often emerge in our lives as lessons to teach us that giving should be done for the giving alone, and not for the expected return. If we give what we desire to give, for the joy of giving, we do not feel owed. If we live for the joy of living, without forcing our demands or expectations upon life, we will not feel that life has shortchanged us. It matters not what your neighbor possesses, because in comparing ourselves to each other, to see how we measure up to each other, we are in effect continually being distracted from seeing and utilizing the blessings that are our own. If we can work to cultivate the ability to appreciate even the smallest gifts, blessings, and gestures, we will begin to create a life that is at least half full instead of half empty. In terms of universal physics, what you focus your attention upon expands. What you resist persists, and what you do not give the energy of appreciation to will eventually demanifest right out of your experience. When you approach the world through the chosen filter of genuine giving, you are in effect being an electrical transmitter, sending energy out to the world around you. When you release this electrical energy in this way, you become more magnetic. As the sending out of energy creates magnetic vortices within the dyadic grid of your anatomy. Dyadic meaning diodes. The magnetized dyadic points then draw in more universal energy supply at a higher frequency and quality than the expressed energy to refill the energy void created by the giving. When you approach the world with the attitude of getting, this natural physics process becomes inverted. The more you try to pull energy from the outside world, the more your energy becomes stuck in the dyadic grid as miasms. The miasms progressively reduce the quantity and lower frequency of the natural energies you can internally draw from the universal supply. Giving, even if in its simplest form of the giving appreciation, keeps the natural energy flow moving. Whatever you give out will return to you amplified. This also works in reverse. However, and giving out a bad attitude of ego, arrogance, and garbage will cause more of the same to flow your way. Appreciate what you have, love it. Find perspectives through which the joy of it can be known, and know that in the act of genuine appreciation itself, you will set loose the powers of manifesting more of what you desire and less of the illusion of lack. The universe owes me mind trap is one of the most powerful self-sabotage games in the world. Trade it in for consistent appreciation, and your world will progressively expand to hold the reality of the things you most desire. If you feel put upon by the world and resentful for having your desires unmet, you owe yourself something. You owe yourself a greater understanding of the nature of creation and a better use of the personal power within the life creation game. Say thank you to the source more often. To help yourself remember what things you have to appreciate, and many more of the kind will be sent along your way. So this is the same thing I've talked about a million times, is we output an energy, the universe carries it back to us. And if we receive the things as that form of energy, the universe will continue to perpetuate that machine in higher and higher frequencies. I've used the analogy of pizza money, right? So if you go to buy a pizza, you exchanged dollars for an energy that is pizza. If you receive that pizza as money energy, you are moving the flow of that energy and transmuting it into other forms, right? When I spent money on audio electronics, or I spent money on biohacking stuff, or I spent money on color puncture tools, everything I ever purchase, I am sending money out with the intention that I am just getting something that is more valuable than that money back to me. So if I spend $1,000 on a product, I pretend that product is bringing me $2,000 in transformation or value or whatever it is. And that creates a cycle that allows me to build that momentum. You can do the same thing with your clients. You can do the same thing with placing trades in the stock market or in Forex or any of these different things, that when you have the intention of giving, when you play this game rather than getting, the universe will align with you much more effectively in how you make decisions, in how you navigate the flow of those energies. 8, patience. I didn't know these were going to go so long, but hopefully you guys are getting a lot out of them. I think they're pretty good. So hopefully you guys are getting a lot out of these. Patience. Source has its own schedule. We either can acknowledge this intrinsic reality or we can fight against it. And if we can cultivate a trust in divine right timing for all of the things that we desire, or the things that we desire but we realize, oh wait, this is not quite showing up yet in the way that I want, then it allows us to be okay in whatever we're experiencing. Because if something is not happening right now, there's always a very good reason for it. And usually that reason exists as part of your higher intelligence mechanisms that understand where it's sending you is going to be way better than if you got that thing now or that experience now, and how that experience would derail either the lessons or the real just experiences that you would have by getting it. So for example, let's say that you really wished you made $1 million when you were 20. Well, your soul said, if I gave you that $20 million or that $1 million, you would never have had the awakenings. You would never have had the true joyful experiences that you will have 3 years at 23 and at 27 and at 50 and at all these other times, that your soul created much more profound experiences that you, from your ego consciousness and your success programming and all these things that say, I'm supposed to be here already, why am I not here? You're missing the fact that the divine right timing of how all of these things unfold are always part of that eternally positive context. And that is an upward spiraling context. And so things, if you align with that timing and you trust that timing and you are able to then understand, oh, these things are not coming up organically for me right now because it's just not the right time. One, it allows you to forgive yourself about that and be easy about that, but it also allows you to then realign and find the momentum in the things that you're actually supposed to be aligning with. It allows you to learn to relax in the unfolding and appreciate the unfolding instead of trying to micromanage and control the way that things are showing up and the way things are unfolding. A lot of times we are, especially if people are having trouble from the quarantine financially, or there's things that happen to them that they lost money during this time and they're scrambling to sell more stuff, or they're scrambling to figure out the next thing that they need to do to make sure that they stay afloat. A lot of times when we get lost in that fear program or that lack program, we get disconnected from that divine right timing, and we don't understand that, oh wait, anytime this has ever happened in the past, I've been taken care of. Whether the way that showed up was my preference, or it was because my parents helped me, or because somebody else came in and helped me, I was still asking for that help as part of my being. And I want to recognize that we are all part of that same all oneness and all connection of how that morphogenetic field interacts. If you can sit and understand that you will be taken care of, and you can understand that the universe is bringing you in a certain direction, then you can just keep taking steps. You take step after step after step, leading you towards the things that are growing your mission, right? You know, I had the idea to do public Facebook groups a long time ago. I had the idea to do a LED color puncture panel years ago. I had the idea to do all kinds of different things, but I also then get the signal, hey, it's not time for that yet. And it might not be time because I need to focus on something else, but it might also not be time because the people I'm sharing it with are not ready for it. And if they're not ready for it, it won't be successful anyway. And so the universe will pace me because it wants me to learn the lessons that I need to learn so that I can be as powerful as I possibly can be at the right times. And patience is difficult. It's really, really difficult, because the times where we need to be patient are the times where we are most experiencing impatience with where we want to be, saying, oh, I was supposed to be there already. Why am I not at this level of success already? I'm judging myself based on someone else's standard of success, or someone else's standard of who I'm supposed to be, or how quickly I'm supposed to learn something, or how quickly I'm supposed to be at a certain level of whatever. And all of these we're all on our own schedule. We're all on our own clock. We're all running our own unique game that is set up to be the most fulfilling to us personally, not the most fulfilling to our neighbor, not the most fulfilling to our friend, not the most fulfilling to our parents, but for us personally. And we need to trust that even though it's not their preference outside of us, we still can realign with the thing that we are being driven to, and the message that we're being driven to, and the medicine that we're being driven to give to the world. Number 9, kindness. Kindness is a birthright, but one that is quite often overlooked and misunderstood. When we approach the world through genuine kind-heartedness, sending love and respect to all creation in honor of the God force that lives within all things, we are again transmitting electrical energy of a higher frequency that will follow the mechanics of universal physics to bring more of the like kind back to us through that backflow. Kindness is a gift we must first give to ourselves in order to have it to give to others. I want you to let that sink in for a second. Kindness is a gift we must first give to ourselves in order to have it to give to others. You can replace kindness with love. You can replace that with money. You can replace it with any type of energetic theme. Kindness implies being conscientious and caring toward the needs, feelings, and desires of both the self and others. And to express this concern and caring in action, attitude, and intention, give to yourself random acts of kindness, then pass along the gift to all who cross your way. Try to be kind to the mean and grouchy neighbor, and you may help them rediscover the ability to smile. When we treat all things with kindness, we demonstrate that we acknowledge their intrinsic value as manifestations of God's source, and you will often find source lovingly returns the favor. Ten, conservation. Conservation is a form of respect and appreciation for source energy in all of its expressions. From conserving and protecting our natural resources, to being attentive to the needs of our bodies, to using the energies of our words and actions with gentle conservation, by which we freely use what is needed, but not more. And that's an important thing to understand. So I am always reminding you not to rescue people from their own catalyst. And sometimes when we are not feeling like we are enough, we say a lot more than we really need to say to deliver the point that we want to make or the information that we want to deliver. And so conservation also is an understanding of the enoughness that exists. Because Source continually recycles its energies for the rebirth of new expressions. All is given freely, but no thing is valueless or wasted. Conservation demonstrates that we have respect and appreciation for the gift of creative energy that God Source has provided to us. As we learn to use this energy in all forms, with respect and clear intention, we will progressively fine-tune our ability to create what we desire. And in this process, assist all other beings to do the same. There is truth in the old saying, waste not, want not. If everything we perceive in our hologram of life is understood to be manifestations of Source, we might all employ a bit more respect, appreciation, and conservation toward the use and application of the energies of the divine. There's a couple of things I want you to understand when I say conservation. There is no limitation to the amount of energy we can push through us. So confirmation does not mean withholding. Conservation does not mean is not any form of lack. Conservation is an understanding of the energy particles that make up all things and how those energy particles move through all things, and how we can be attentive to the balance, right? So if you go back to the image I painted where you have you have this grid of particles, and the particles create a focal point that becomes a hand, and around it is the more scattered particles. Well, we're constantly transferring particles from the left hand to the right hand. And as we transfer those particles, we want to understand if I transfer too many without having something replenishing the supply, we are going to not be conserving the energy of the system. And so we want to be recognizing, okay, I need to give to myself and I need to give to the other. And I need to move these energies in a certain way so that this machine that creates the flow of energy through our life is working. Right? It's not about always giving. It's not about always receiving. It's about understanding the conservation between that so that we can honor what we're feeling in our body. We can also show up in our medicine and in our work for people around us because we are empowered through conserving and making sure that we're pouring from our overflow. 11, cooperation diplomacy. Existence is and will always be a co-creative endeavor. We must be willing to allow other beings the fulfillment of their needs and desires if we hope to have our fulfillment known. Creating win-win situations and creating with the intention of giving genuinely are natural ways of being. We might not always agree with the intended creations of others, and we may all have a right to our points of view. Diplomacy can be a bridge between the forces of opposition, through which effective actions or decisions can be reached to mutually support each perspective. We can learn to agree to disagree respectfully. So the spiritual art of cooperative co-creation can progressively evolve to higher levels of expression. Pretty simple. Work together. Always work together. Even when you're enemies, work together. Even when you think they're evil, work together. Even when you think they're demons, save the demons. There is no opposition. Everything, even if they are on the opposite side of the fence, is still fundamentally part of these same systems. And even though some of them have a different agenda that goes against the eternal positive context of creation, which is why they fell from their soul matrix, even though some of them have done this at a very high level of these ET beings, and they're doing things on this planet that are not our preference, these beings can still come back and be transplanted and go back through the re-evolutionary rise, reconnection to a new soul matrix and re-evolve through the seeding cycles the same way humanity has. And we've had those same kind of things happen to us. 12, last one, sense. Learning to identify and apply both common sense and uncommon sense of spiritual knowing will allow us to have the greatest balance of energy expression within all of our lives. We have to understand that some things are common sense and a lot of things are not, especially when it comes to spirituality. If we have been programmed that higher sensory perception is demonic, or we've been programmed that certain energies that come through us are demonic and others are preferable and some are not, then we are cutting off our uncommon senses to be able to translate what are energies in our waking reality. And when I say that, we have to understand that seeing through the frequency veil, seeing through the frequency fence, seeing through the veil, seeing the illusions that are being created in the media. This requires an uncommon sense. Even though when you have that uncommon sense, it seems like common sense to you when you look at it, right? So we want to recognize that our common sense might be an uncommon sense to somebody else if we are more activated than they are. And that will become more and more apparent as you do some of the stuff that I presented in this group. As you become more activated, you will just see things and you will see through those illusions, and those illusions won't even be there. So when you look at somebody who's behaving in the illusion, you see somebody who is in 2 inches of water acting like they're drowning, and you're sitting here looking like you're in 2 inches, it's 2 inches deep, guys. And so they get stuck, and you have to recognize that the only reason you know that is because you have tapped into that uncommon sense that they have not tapped into yet. And the more you can balance that and interact with that and be able to recognize that that's what you are operating on, the easier it'll be for you to be in this position, because eventually it gets really distinct. That when you see this stuff, that like as soon as it comes up, your radar goes off immediately and says, oh no, that's another charade, that's another smoke screen, that's another fallacy. And you see it immediately, whereas people are like sharing and chatting and doing all these things and pouring energy into it. And you have a period of time where you just, okay, you saw it, you got the ding, and you're like, why did everybody else not immediately see that? Why do people not notice that? How do people keep falling for this charade? And we have to recognize that people fall for this charade because they haven't developed that higher sensory perception yet. They haven't developed those uncommon senses. And that is part of our responsibility as spiritual mastery, is to develop those senses so that we can see through that veil and show up in the embodiment of the human being who lives without that veil in place. And that will then get other people to say, oh, he is sitting in a pillar of fire and not getting burned. How does he do that? And then you can show them, then you can demonstrate, then they can come to you and you can share, this is how you get here. Okay, what questions do you guys have about these? And what other stuff is coming up? What else can we talk about? We can talk about beliefs for a little bit if you want, or if you have other questions, feel free to bring them up. Oops, somebody was asking, were you guys asking stuff in the chat? Let me see. Oh yeah, let me see. Oh, gotcha, cool. How can you show compassion towards someone with words? If they are sad and you obviously do not want to completely ignore that person, but how do you show compassion without saying, oh, don't be sad, or trying to rescue them from what they are feeling without seeming careless? So my mom will know a little bit about this because I did this a lot for her. Compassion is not always someone's preference. And we really want to recognize that. Sometimes showing compassion for somebody is letting them be in their pain and in their catalyst. Sometimes showing compassion for someone is simply sitting next to them and letting them be without you needing to fix it, without you needing to tell them any advice, without you needing to do anything. And so if you can start to if you are first recognize within yourself the savior programs and things that you want to run because you feel bad about their feeling bad. If you can step back and not feel bad, if you can figure out a way to feel good about their feeling bad, not because you want them to feel bad, but because you appreciate the catalyst and the beauty in catalyst. Like for me, when I see somebody have these sort of events, or they have a conflict with their parents, or they have a conflict with their partners, and we're able to workshop those details, and we're able to then see well, I don't know, lost my train of thought there, but if we see somebody who is in pain and telling a story of pain, or they're had something happen to them and they are in the story of what happened, part of what is very helpful for a lot of people is simply learning how to feel what they're feeling. So validate their reality. One of the best things you can do to show compassion to somebody is simply validating their reality. So if they are somebody who is afraid and they believe that there are, that somebody is bullying them, whatever it is, or somebody's being mean to them, or somebody's saying nasty things, or they were abused or whatever, and you're sitting next to a friend. Abuse is an easy one. So you're sitting next to a friend who was abused, and you want to hold a safe container for their truth, and their truth can be whatever it is. If their truth is that they hate the person and that they're really angry, allow them to express what their truth is. And then also be so when you validate their truth in what they're experiencing, it immediately takes their guard down, because they spend the reason that they're feeling a lot of times what they're feeling is because their entire life they've been told the reality isn't real. They've been told what they're feeling is not the right thing to feel. They've been told what they're thinking is not the right thing to think. And then somebody comes in and says, that's a wrong thing to think. If you thought this, you'd feel better. If you change this behavior, you'd be better. And so what happens is these people take these external voices that says you could be better and feel better if you do what I say, and they internalize that. The most healing comes when these people integrate the truth of what they're going through. And so if you see this friend who was abused and they're telling this story, then validate their truth. Validate what they believe happened. Validate what they're feeling. Give them permission to feel what they're feeling, and encourage them to give themselves permission to feel what they're feeling. You literally don't need to do anything beyond that. That alone will just create the snowball mechanisms that they realize, oh, I was feeling bad because I actually was telling myself not to feel what I was feeling. I was feeling bad because I was telling myself I'm not supposed to be upset about this. Or I'm telling myself, or I'm listening to these negative voices and embodying that instead of listening to my own truth and my own reality. We all can have different realities and different perspectives, and all of that is okay. And the more you recognize that, the more empowered you will be to interact with these people that are hurting around you. So if you're home and your family is part of the group that is still lost in the fear of COVID-19, and they're lost in the fear of the racial issues and the looting, and they're lost in the fear of what's going to happen next, and they're stuck in these stories, they have a reason to feel that. They are afraid. They are thinking the things that they're thinking. So teach them how to give themselves permission to think that. Once they've learned to give themselves permission to think that, they can actually begin to rewrite what they're thinking from their present moment point of power. When they give themselves permission, they can then make a choice whether they just want to engage with it or don't want to. When you are repressing it, saying, I don't want to feel this, or I'm not supposed to feel this, that lack of permission does not allow the flow of that energy. And that then continues to create a miasma that continues to recreate those same patterns over and over again. which is why people keep having the same relationships show up over and over and over again. They keep asking for their partner to do the same things over and over and over again. And so this whole game is always an inside game. If you are showing up for a friend who you're being asked to show compassion for, if that friend needs compassion, how can you hold a safe container and allow them to give compassion to themselves by being truthful with themselves and by expressing their own realities and giving themselves permission to feel? There's nothing more compassionate than letting somebody be in their own truth. And there's also nothing more powerful for you to step into. And that's a really hard lesson to learn. That took me a really long time to learn. It's actually one that I learned from my dad. My mom had some bad events that happened, and it was over Christmas one of these years where I had just broken up with, I'd gotten out of a bad relationship and wanted my mom to nurture me, and she took the spotlight, is what I felt. And when I was talking to her, no matter what I said, we were not matching. No matter how much logic, no matter how much energy that I poured into my argument to get her to wake up from whatever reality she was living, it was not working. It wouldn't have worked, and it never will work. And that's a really important thing to recognize, because at the time, and I use this analogy all the time, if she believes the sky is yellow and I believe the sky is blue, she's allowed to still believe the sky is yellow. And if you let her have that belief, she can heal, because then she can get the opportunity to integrate the past aspects of her as her truth, and then change her present moment point of focus. And the same goes for any of these people who have a different viewpoint from you. If you can look at that viewpoint and say, they have a viewpoint, therefore they had a life that led them to that viewpoint. They had enough learning that was, they had enough learning that allowed them to cultivate that reality for themselves based on their experiences. Those experiences were right because they led them there to that moment catalyst that they needed to learn. And you giving them permission to see that as what it is, as what they see it as, gives them permission then to do a whole lot more than that, to shift a whole lot more than that. And it's really hard to do until you're confronted with opportunities to do that, and practice that and cultivate the muscles around that. What other questions do you guys have? I didn't even get into beliefs today, but I think this actually covers a lot of the belief structures anyways. And we'll talk more specifically about beliefs and changing them. And I'll actually teach, you know what, I think I will save that for next week, because then I'll teach you guys an actual technique for taking the crystallized beliefs, finding them in your body, and then how to destroy them, basically. So we'll do that next week. I think that'll be a good one to do. That one is a quick technique. I just don't remember all the details off the top of my head. I'll have to think about it a little bit more and see if I can get the other pieces of it so I don't lead you through it wrong. But yeah, it'll be a good one to help us restructure some of those beliefs. And really, it's not so much to change the belief, it is to vaporize the old belief so you can put a new one in there or operate on whatever the base algorithms are that we're supposed to be operating on. Cool. I'm glad, Lucy, that helped. Yeah. So what else? What else has been coming up for you guys? What are you guys feeling? I know we've gotten really long already today. So lots of good stuff. Did you guys like this? Was this useful for you? Did you find this to be fairly practical? I was hoping this would be pretty practical for you. Cool. Yeah, like I really like it because it's kind of a roadmap to kind of be able to evaluate our interactions and how we show up in the world. So when we're conflicted about making decisions or how we're interacting with our bosses or how we're making decisions around money or whatever else, I was hoping that this mapping can say, okay, what is my energy doing? What is my intention behind this? What am I sensing, and what is the motivation behind these things, so that I can hold myself accountable, so that I can be appreciative of how these things unfold and all that kind of stuff. So I will also post these because it'll be easier to read than to go through this entire one again. I don't know if you guys took notes or not, but I will post this for you guys in the membership so you can go through it and use it as a reference as well. And yeah, and I think if you guys don't have any other questions, unless Eric, did you have a question?
Not a question. I just wanted to share something that
Yeah.
that lately, the last couple of days, I've realized how powerful or important sharing information, like giving out information, for one, brings that back to you. Because earlier on in the quarantine, I was sharing like a lot on Facebook, like good information. And then I had a client who just recently, or a potential client who just recently came to me because he liked my, I don't know, character and what I was sharing. And so for one, it's super helpful to share that energy, and also to share, to be specific with the energy as well. It's like, I want this type of client. I want to share this type of information. I want to give someone this type of transformation. So that's what I'm going to output. And then it'll attract that type of person, the perfect, like ideal kind of client to you.
Exactly. You know, and there's, for those who haven't seen those sessions, you know, the ones about finding your ideal customer, and the ones about the energy mechanisms behind that are exactly what Eric is talking about. And he's experiencing it firsthand, is the fact that, you know, if you look at my Q&As, really the only thing I really do to bring in sales through this stuff and through my other products is my Q&As. And that is literally just me giving information. It is helping people for free in the hopes that eventually they'll want, that energy will be carried back to me. And it does get carried back to me. And usually even more so than what I feel like I put out now. And then that builds momentum. And so one of the things that I really learned is a really strong lesson when I did my audio business was, when I first started my audio business, I was designing power supplies that were the lowest noise power supplies in the world, not even just in the market that I was in, but anywhere. And I was so afraid of people hacking my stuff open to see what was inside, that people kept hacking my stuff open to see what was inside. It just kept happening. And I kept losing money because people kept breaking it, opening it, breaking it, and then having to send it and sending it back, and then writing nasty reviews about me because they hacked it open and broke it, and I was trying to charge them for warranty. It was just a nightmare of things because I was living in lack. What I later realized is, if I share everything I know all the time, or like as much as I can share anyway, about my audio equipment and my technologies, and I take pictures of what's inside, people stopped hacking it open. And I started getting even more ideas. I started getting more information. I started getting more insights and more of these things that kept me moving forward. And I realized, wait, by the time somebody copies what I'm doing, I'm 12 steps ahead. Let them copy me. Let them try and keep up with my life, right? You know, why don't you try? You know, you're not supposed to be the hero in somebody else's story. In the same way, if someone is trying to copy my stuff because they're not creating their own, it's going to be very hard for them to keep up, because by the time they do catch up, I'm already way, way ahead of them, because I'm giving and I'm letting that energy flow through, and that energy is creating more for me to give, and that creates more information, and I can continue to move from that. And that is a much more powerful place to be. I can literally take my hip mobility programs or my shoulder mobility programs, and I can share everything on my Instagram, and people will still buy it. I could share every technique I possibly know at different times on my social media. Some people could scroll through there and find it if they really wanted. Other people will still buy my program. I could teach all of these things and share every, different sessions on different groups, and I could share pieces of it. Doesn't matter. You can take stuff that you've learned from here, and you can take stuff you've learned from there, and you can share a bunch of stuff for free for, in your Facebook groups that you have other clients pay for, and you'll still have more stuff to add to the paid group. You'll still have more stuff to add as value to the other things that you do. And it's really important to recognize that, because people are not, they're buying for the transformation that you can create. They're not buying for the one piece of information. They're not buying for that one exercise that you came up with. They're not buying those things. They're buying from you. They're buying from the energy that you're outputting. And they're also interacting with the fact that you are trying to interact with a past aspect of yourself. And the more you can really understand that, the easier it is. Like if you had yourself sitting across from you, would you not give a past version of yourself everything you currently have? Why wouldn't you? Would you not give yourself everything you currently have to give them a leg up? Of course you would. These people are the past version of yourself. And the more you can give to them, the more they're going to give back to you, and the more you're going to have to give to them. Talk about a powerful way to live, right? Like nothing can knock that down, no matter how much somebody wants to take from you. And like none of that matters, because then you're always pouring from your overflow.
Yeah, I realized how important the energy flow is, like giving out that energy, taking in the energy, not keeping the energy in me stagnant. Like when I do receive energy from someone, spending it on this group or on a functional patterns course. So I just gain even more knowledge and can give out even more useful information. And then it's just like a continual building and flowing of energy.
Exactly. Yep. Yep. And that's good, because you know, and like I said, everything I always say here is I'm not here to be anybody's guru. I don't want to be any of those. I don't want people to be asking me what to do, right? And that's a big problem with that guru mentality. Is what I want people to recognize is that everything I teach in this group is to teach you where your own compass is. It's to teach you how to navigate those energies. It's to teach you how to make decisions. It's to teach you how to be empowered. And if you can always refocus yourself to that, into where am I leaking energy? Where am I giving my power away if I'm feeling a thing I don't want to feel, or experiencing a thing I don't want to experience, whether that's, you know, relationship, money, career, whatever. Always cycling back to that. All right, guys, let's call that a day for today. Good chat. I think this is a good one. And as usual, post stuff in the group. Let me know what's coming up for you during the week, and that'll give me a better idea of what to talk about next. Like I said, there's a lot of these structures we can talk about. If you like the journeys, ask and I'll put another one together. If you want to do more of the activations, we can do that. If you want to do, if you want to learn about some of the bigger structures that we're traveling to when we do these activations, I can also talk about the structures and what they are and where they fit into kind of the cosmoverse, if you want to call it that. Because there's the universe that humanity is fed is a lot smaller than what the actual cosmoverse is. And so the more we understand the bigger structure, the more we understand how we fit into it, because as we understand the bigger structures, we understand that we are a lot more important than what we originally thought when we're just living this human trivial lifestyle. And so there's actually a lot of things that we can get out of knowing some of these other things as well. So think about it. Let me know what is interesting to you guys. If you like, or if it tends to fly over your head, but you're still interested in it, a lot of times when we learn it, it'll plant a seed, and that will just create the upward spiraling mechanism for you to translate it over time. So even this stuff, like if some of it was hard for you to really grasp, it will translate. It just plants seeds, and you will notice it showing up now in other ways in your life, and it'll just validate itself as you go along. It's why I usually tell people, when you're listening to me for the first time, see everything I say as fiction until you no longer can see it as fiction. And that's a fun way to be. You know, that also is really powerful when you share stuff with people that they may not believe. It's a really good way to disarm people. Because so many people want to argue about truth, but if you present it as fiction, and then the fiction is so overwhelmingly true that that it overwhelms their circuits, then that works really well also. The other thing I had talked about doing the ciphers for, like, watching some of these movies or TV shows and doing a cipher for those to show you where the mind control programs are being installed and what they are, and the different like true stories that those movies are based on. There's some really fun movies that are like that that I could do. I had looked at doing that like through Zoom, and there's a delay between the audio and video, so it might have to be something where like we sync up the video in the background, or we all watch it on our own screens while we talk about it. I'm still working up the kinks on it, but I think that'll be a really cool idea to give people a visual reference for where that mind control comes from. You know, most people, when they hear mind control, they're thinking they'll be aware of it. And, you know, they think, well, I'd know if I was mind controlled. And so they just don't understand how those things get imprinted and how they work and that kind of stuff. So I think it'll be cool to show them in movies, well, this movie happened at this time and this was telling you this message. And then that grew into this. And then they had these things that happened. And these are the stories that were actually happening in the universe that this movie is based on. Blah, blah, blah. So there's some really cool stuff in that that you guys might find fascinating. It's certainly interesting. I don't know how useful it is, but it's certainly fascinating and entertaining. I'll do it separately from the group chats. It'll be a free thing for everybody, but I think that'll be fun. And if you guys are interested in it, just let me know. It'll be more votes towards doing that. So, all right, guys. Well, have a good rest of your Sunday, and I will talk to you next week.
Thanks. See y'all.